My name is Victor Furman. Some call me the Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me now and we will explore these topics and so much more with fascinating guests, authors, and experts who will guide us to Destination Unlimited. Tantra is an ancient Sanskrit word that derives from the esoteric practices of Buddhism and Hinduism. In the 20th century, it came to denote sacred sexual practices that were known only to initiates and those who sought them out. What is the truth behind Tantra? Can this ancient practice help us find fulfillment spiritually and sexually? Can learning the secrets of Tantra bring new and deeper connection and joy to couples, especially those who are looking to revitalize their relationships? My guests this week on Destination Unlimited, Somraj Pokras and Jeffre Talltrees, bring their years of experience, practice, and their own relationship to answer these and many other questions about Tantra. Somraj studied with acclaimed sexologist Margot Anand and taught in her year-long love and ecstasy training. Jeffre Talltrees is an author, workshop leader, and licensed psychologist who also studied with Margot Anand and also taught the love and ecstasy training. Together, Somraj and Jeffre co-founded Tantra at Tahoe, where they teach workshops and counsel couples. Together, they've written a veritable library on sacred sex. His website is tantraattahoe.com. Her website is sacredrainbowmesa.com. They join me this week to discuss their latest book, Tantric Pathways to Supernatural Sex. Please welcome to Destination Unlimited, Somraj and Jeffre. Good evening.
Good evening.
And thank you both for joining us this week.
Our pleasure.
So please share with our listeners your respective paths and how they led to your partnership.
I'll start first. I began as a nurse and moved into psychology and got my PhD. And then along the way, I got interested in Tantra. Went through Margot's training, her teacher's training, and taught with her. And then my most recent endeavor, I should say is 16 years old now, so it's not terribly recent, is shamanic healing. And I teach shamanic healing to students.
Do you see teaching shamanic healing and energy work as a natural extension of the tantric path?
Absolutely. Tantra is very shamanic, and it's my theory, although I haven't read this in a book, that around 10,000 years ago, it was shamans who put the pieces together because of their connection with spirit, that sexual energy could be used to move through the system and eventually connect with spirit directly.
And Somraj, what about your path?
Well, I started very relevantly as an organic chemist, but I didn't work in that. I became a people skills training consultant for Fortune 500 companies for 25, 30 years. And really only dabbled part-time in the spiritual side of life. And when I met Jeffre, who was already studying with Margot in her teacher's program, I got interested and kind of dived in completely, and adopted the additional view. You might say it's like a left brain, right brain process that I went through. I went from the left to adding in energy sensitivity, not just in the bedroom, but throughout all of life.
So in essence, you went from organic chemistry to orgasmic chemistry.
Oh, that's a good one, Victor. I wish I'd thought of that.
I'm fairly quick to get these kind of little repartees, but let's leave that behind us. So now,
the subtitle of our book is The Chemistry of Sexual Electricity.
That's right.
Which probably would make some of my professors turn over in their grave.
That's right. I just hope they don't take that as battery. But anyway, let's define some terms for our listeners who may not be familiar with Tantra or may have some misconceptions about it. First of all, what is Tantra? What is the origin of the practice? And is the original practice related to sex?
Actually, there is a book that addresses the origins of Tantra by a Dutch fellow who's traced back the origins of Tantra in India maybe 7,000 years ago, before the current structure, which actually was the result of the Aryans, who we normally equate with Germany, but they invaded India, which was matriarchal and shamanic and much more pagan, and became a much more structured society where Tantra therefore went underground.
And let's get into a definition. So the original word Tantra, what does that mean?
I don't know what the original
Well,
word
we've
is.
heard various versions. Sanskrit is a fascinating language where a word might have a dozen meanings. And weaving, we believe, symbolizing the weaving of all the different energies in the body at the various energy centers, the chakras, is really what it really stands for. But it was used originally for the secret writings. When Tantra went underground, the writings were called the Tantras.
And was the original practice having to do with sacred sexuality, or was it something else?
No, it had to do with sacred sexuality from the beginning.
But it was really expansive. It had to do with spirit and physical energy and love, heart energy, and all the other kinds of energy, and the merger, or the weaving, I guess, to use the word. Mm-hmm. So sex was an integral part, but it wasn't the purpose. It was like a tool, which seems to have really caught on and been much more impactful in the West.
Now, Tantra has its own special vocabulary related to the sexual organs. What are those words?
Well, for the woman, the word is yoni, and technically speaking, that refers to the mons. But when we're just talking, we have it include the vagina as well.
In our book, we talk about the outer yoni, as Jeffre described, and then the inner yoni within the vaginal canal. The whole thing is the yoni.
And what about the male sexual organ?
Well, there are two names. Margot prefers the word Vajra, which means lightning bolt. So we use Vajra. In widespread Tantra, many teachers use the term lingam,
which is a Hindu word.
And in many Hindu temples, don't they worship what's known as the Shiva Lingam, which is a representation of the phallus of Shiva?
Yes.
To the best of my knowledge.
In fact, we went to a temple ascribed to a civilization predating the Incas I think that was in Bolivia, where they had the same kind of statues in a shrine.
Similar to the Shiva Lingam.
Exactly.
That's fascinating. Do you know whether you know the source on those? Do they have any information about that?
Actually, it is a tourist destination besides Lake Titicaca. And it was, all of this is hearsay. So
no written records.
Right. That was a fertility temple where couples would come and give offerings to a particular lingam, and because there was a lot of them, and to support their hopes and desires for a family.
That's fascinating. And it would not be uncommon for different cultures, especially shamanic-based cultures, to sometimes have similar representations.
Yeah, that's true.
It's interesting.
Now, with reference to the yoni, we also are familiar in Tantra with what is known as the sacred spot, the goddess spot, what the doctor referred to as the G spot. What is that place? What does that mean?
Those are modern tantrikas. I'm sure that in the ancient world, there was a name, because I'm sure that they discovered that. But the goddess spot or the sacred spot is very modern, and it refers to what is known as the Grafenberg spot. The spot is a word that was added by journalists, not by medical doctors or tantrikas for that matter.
The confusion is it actually refers to the spongy erectile tissue around the urethra, the tube that conveys urine out of the body. And different women, and there's scientific studies about this, have different places in that sponge, the urethral sponge, that become engorged if they're treated properly.
And when you say treated properly, you're talking about being massaged, being rubbed.
Yes, correct.
Okay. Now, do men also have a sacred spot?
Oh, yes, and that's my husband's specialty. So I'm going to let him talk to that one.
It's actually the prostate gland.
Mm-hmm. And how is that stimulated?
Well, it can be stimulated through what some call the P spot in the perineum, commonly on the street called the taint, because it's not the anus and it's not the testicles. But the best way to do it is with a finger inserted in the anus and reach it directly. Not at all like a digital rectal exam that us men have had to undergo.
We'll continue with that after the break. My guests this week on Destination Unlimited, Somraj Pokras and Jeffre Talltrees. Their book is called Tantric Pathways to Supernatural Sex, a groundbreaking look at the chemistry of sexual electricity. We'll be back with more of them after these words on the OMTimes radio network.
OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Looking for inspiration?
Want to be inspired?
Not sure where to go?
Find Mark and Kim every Wednesdays at 3 p.m. Eastern on Inspired Living.
Topics will elevate consciousness and range from metaphysics to the human and social experience and all things spiritual.
Welcome to an inspired community that offers support, encouragement, and new ways of thinking. You are the inspired and the inspiration.
We are live outside the home of Joe and Rosie Goddard, where a pretty big tickle fight broke out just minutes ago. Sources say their father instigated the laughter. Let's go inside for a comment. Apparently, they have no comment. Dads, let this be a reminder that it only takes a moment to make a moment. Call 877-4DAD-411 or visit fatherhood.gov. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Ad Council.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guests this evening are Somraj Pokras and Jeffre Talltrees. We're talking about their book, Tantric Pathways to Supernatural Sex. So we were sort of doing some definitions and some vocabulary in the first segment. Let's talk about Kundalini. What is Kundalini, and how does this relate to Tantra?
It's the ancient name for sexual energy, which anybody can relate to who's had goosebumps or a heat flush or felt sensations from sex or even exercise or love spreading throughout their bodies. It's the Kundalini, the sexual energy that innervates our cells and makes our nerves tingle and our muscles twitter. All the things that are wonderful when you practice supernatural sex.
Now, Kundalini is also representative, if I'm not mistaken, of the coiled serpent at the base of the spine uncoiling and coming up as these energies are starting to flow. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yes.
Coiled 3.5 times, according to the Hindu pundits.
And is this a cobra? What type of snake is this, or what type of serpent is it?
I really don't know that, but being from India, it could be a cobra. It's more a visual representation of the experience that you have in the Sushumna, the central channel that goes between the chakras, the first being at the base of the spine and moving up to the crown of the head.
Now, I'm familiar with the term Kundalini Yoga. Is this different from Kundalini Yoga?
It is, although the yoga postures and activities of Kundalini Yoga are designed to raise that serpent or raise the Kundalini, as we find an important facet of supernatural sex. But the practices are much different.
Now, when and how was sacred sexual practice first linked to the concept of Tantra?
Well, that's an interesting question, because it's my understanding that it evolved together, that Tantra was always spiritual, Tantra was always sexual. So I don't think it was a matter of ordinary sex somehow being modified. It just was Tantra.
See, in the West, we have a distinction between sex and spirit. The Tantras did not. It was all the same energy on a spectrum. You could call Kundalini a sexual energy at the lower chakras. You could call it the motivating force of love at the heart, or wisdom in the third eye, or connection to the divine and the whole universe at the crown. But it's all just energy.
So in the process of raising Kundalini, especially as a tantric couple, the concept is actually almost the state of completion, isn't it?
Yes. In fact, one of my favorite definitions of Tantra is ecstasy at the height of sexual union, meaning the same as enlightenment.
And when you think about it, that concept is a form of enlightenment. It's really total awareness of your place with the other person and your collective energy together.
Right, exactly. And this could all be done individually. You can individually become a tantric. It's just so much easier when you're with somebody that you have energy with, you have chemistry with.
And fun.
And fun.
Okay.
I think it's fun either way.
I think you're both right. Now, your new book is entitled Tantric Pathways to Supernatural Sex. How do you define supernatural in relation to sex? When I think of supernatural, I think of things like ghosts and paranormal activity. How do you define it with this?
It's Jeffre's term, so you need to define that there. You came up with it originally.
I did?
You did.
Right. Supernatural means beyond natural. And it connects to the energy world. In my shamanic world, the world that most people live in is about 10% of what exists, and 90% is invisible. So we're talking about combining the visible and the invisible, that which you can feel and that which you can't. So it's a step above what rabbits do. It's a way step, a big step above.
So I'm sorry, go ahead.
My take to describe supernatural sex is to compare it to ordinary sex. Now, we love every kind of sex. We're very accepting and open, and we practice all sorts of things. But ordinary sex is typically lust-driven. It's more animalistic. It's like going for the gold, for the completion quickly. And instead of cultivating and raising the energy, when you slow down at the beginning, you may go fast at the end, it doesn't matter. But when you slow down at the beginning, what you do is you expand into a different universe of all these chakra energies combining and exchanging, which creates all these different sensations and awarenesses. So maybe it's not magic, not that kind of supernatural, but it is beyond natural, as Jeffre said.
And I think when someone like people like yourselves have achieved that level of connection, that level of raising energy together, it actually becomes your natural, isn't it?
Correct.
That's true.
Yes.
So it's no longer supernatural. It's really your relationship. It's what you bring together in your knowledge and your wisdom and in your caring for one another.
It's natural for us, but it is super.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this question. Is this a sex book or a spiritual book or a combination of both?
It's a combination of both because there is no separation in Tantra. And we believe that sex is fundamentally a meditation and a way of using the body to experience spirit and pleasure. So it's both.
Anything to add to that?
I like that.
Good. I like it too. So how does supernatural sex transform ordinary lovemaking into a true spiritual communion?
Once a couple have mastered some fundamental sexual practices, energy practices, a lover uses these energy-based practices to release the mind's grip of reality, and one slips into a meditative state where you surrender to pleasure and spirit.
Okay. And what actually is sexual energy, and how do supernatural lovers use it?
The vibrations in your nerves, in your muscles that produce the sensations of sex, which become very intense, of course, in the genitals. We prefer the term jewels, just not to use medical terms. But that it's a life force that takes different colors, flavors at different chakras at different places in the body. And when you use all the colors of the rainbow, for an analogy, then you're interacting with your partner at multiple energy levels. That's supernatural.
And can you, I'm familiar with practices where people in this type of truly magical sexual union dedicate that energy to a higher purpose or a goal. Can you do that also with Tantra?
Absolutely.
Can you give me an example?
In fact, Margot Anand has written a book called Sex Magic, and that's what the whole book is about.
Give me an example of something that you folks have done.
Creating a symbol to represent your goal, your intention, and then together, as you raise your energy, your sexual energy, you release that symbol at the point of orgasm, or multiple times if you have multiple orgasms.
And when you say the symbol, you're talking about a visualization?
Yes.
Please give me an example of something that the two of you have used together.
Our hearts merging as one, our biofields, the bioenergetic field some call aura, becoming one, unifying, and feeling that there's no separation between us. So we have that picture of merger as one manifestation of the sex magic.
And is there something specific other than this wonderful communion that you're describing that you've dedicated this to at one point or another in your relationship where you had a specific outcome or a goal, or is this just for everything?
I think we probably tend toward the general rather than the specific, but I do know of couples who have used specific goals and have had delicious results.
Your question is kind of Western goal-oriented, and I appreciate it because that's the way people think, but Tantric supernatural sex is not goal-oriented. It's more about being in the experience. So, at least for me, and I think Jeffre would probably agree, we don't have an intention other than, you might say, playing in the sandbox of Kundalini.
So it's not the destination, it's about how you get there.
Exactly.
Wonderful. My guests this week on Destination Unlimited, Somraj Pokras and Jeffre Talltrees. They're the authors of Tantric Pathways to Supernatural Sex, a groundbreaking look at the chemistry of sexual electricity. Please tell our listeners where they can find out more about you two, where they can get your books, and everything else.
Well, Tantric Pathways is available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble websites, ebook and a paperback. And they can also find it on our website, supernatural.sex.
And you also have a website, Jeffre?
Yes, it's my shamanic website, sacredrainbowmesa.com.
And what can our listeners find when they go to your website?
A background history of the tradition that I practice, and a little bit about me and what I offer, the classes that I offer and the services that I offer.
And we'll be back with more of Somraj and Jeffre after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
This is OTR-FM, part of the IOM Radio Network.
Humanity Healing International is a small nonprofit with a big dream. Since 2007, HHI has been working tirelessly to bring help to communities with little or no hope. Our projects are not broad mandates, nor are they overnight solutions, but they bring the reassurance that no one is alone and that someone cares. To learn more, please visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
Tune in to the Practical Intuitive, Mind, Body, Spirit for the Real World with me, host Robin Fritz, Mondays at 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 Eastern. I'll cover personal and business intuition, animal communication, mediumship, space clearing, past life regression, shamanic insights, energy healing, soul choice, and more, all to help you tap your own intuitive and healing skills. No ifs, ands, or buts.
So I'm a cat, and I just moved in with this new human, and she's got this little toy she's always playing with, all day long. Tap, 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 bloop, bloop. She can't put it down. There it is. Oh, and get this. She even talks to it. Last week, she asked it for Chinese, and guess what? Egg rolls showed up. Like magic. Humans have cool toys.
A person is the best thing to happen to a shelter pet. Be that person. Adopt. Brought to you by the Ad Council and the ShelterPetProject.org.
Adopt US Kids presents What to Expect When You're Expecting a Teenager. Learning the lingo.
GOAT, G-O-A-T, acronym, stands for Greatest of All Time. As in, spaghetti sandwiches for dinner? They're my fave. Dad, you're the GOAT.
You don't have to speak teen to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same. Visit adoptuskids.org. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Adopt U.S. Kids, and the Ad Council.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guests this evening are Somraj Pokras and Jeffre Talltrees, talking about their new book, Tantric Pathways to Supernatural Sex. And before the break, you were talking about your websites, and during the break, you told me something very special about your new website. What's the URL of your new website?
Supernatural.sex.
.sex. Isn't that wonderful?
We now have extensions on URLs that allow us to put what it really is instead of .com or .org.
It will be .orgasm now, right?
That would even be better.
That would even be better. There you go. Okay. So Let's get back into what we were talking about before the break. How is this book different from all other books on sex that are out there?
Well, there's a lot of great books about Tantra, about the spiritual background of it, about Kundalini Yoga, about Tantric sex, which deal with using the facilities to generate and raise and exchange Kundalini. And there's also many, many books written by doctors and researchers about the sexual anatomy, the G-spot. There's a great book about the woman coming first. There's great books about masturbation, and on in the sex field. What's unique about this book is it's a merger of the two. It's not about do this to this particular spot in the body and then you'll have an orgasm. Well, it is there. Or connect with your partner heart to heart, soul to soul, and this will expand your connection and then energize your sex, which is also true and valuable. It's a merger of the two. Take this kind of sexual activity, this technique, and focus on your energy, use your breath and your mind and the energy awareness you've generated, and exchange that energy. And what you get then is a microcosm of what Tantra is, a merger of the body and the spirit, of the physical and the non-material.
And you call this sexual electricity. Go ahead and define that a little more.
Well, it's the way that many of us, certainly for me, experience Kundalini raising. If you have a lot of energy in your first and second chakras, typically in your root chakra, which I refer to as lust. It's the urge of the body to reproduce and rush towards the finish line and have a quick release and a quick orgasm. You don't really have time to feel the electrons energizing the nerves and spreading throughout your body. But if you do go slow or take a moment to feel more and enhance your sensations, then you feel your nerves tingling and your body bristling and tickling. And those are the symptoms of the electricity that the energy produces, and it can fill your whole body for whole body orgasms.
So we have voltage, which is the force behind it. We have current, which is the flow of the electrons. What happens when you meet with resistance from your partner? That's a joke, by the way. I'm being funny, so I'm sorry if I'm failing this.
But we take that seriously because a big part of what we do is sexual healing when there is resistance. So, yeah, it happens in one body as well. We run into our shame, the programming we've gotten from our elders or society. We have internal resistance that's preventing the electricity from flowing and filling us.
That's a new take on Ohm's law, isn't it?
It is, definitely.
Now, you have this wonderful book. A couple gets this book. They start reading it together and doing some of the practices. Is it necessary for them to join a tantric group to transform their sex life after reading the book?
No, not really. We've had many clients. We do telephone counseling as well. So we've had many clients who just had the book. We have a basic tantric book as well. And they do marvelously. They discipline themselves and they get together frequently and they read the book and they do the practices and feel very good about the results. Not everyone can do that. We don't necessarily have the internal discipline. Somehow it gets kind of shoved back on the back burner and it never really comes to fruition. But most couples would benefit from going to a workshop or two to kind of jumpstart the whole process.
But there's no church, there's no central authority that conveys the dogma of Tantra. So there are many people who go to one workshop and they have the interest and aptitude and they become teachers. They may or may not form a group. There is a half a dozen very big networks and groups that certify teachers, but there's so many ways to do it, and you can do it on your own without any guru or teacher.
You know, it's interesting. I'm just thinking about it, at least in my generation and perhaps the couple of generations that came. I was born in 1953, but perhaps some of the generations that came after me. There was always a sense until, I guess, the late 60s, early 70s of being shamed about our sexuality. How do you deal with being from a background where sexuality was considered to be shameful or sinful?
Well, I really appreciate you saying that we're past that, but we're not. It's still very pervasive in our society. It doesn't appear that way on the surface, but what we see in advertising and we hear in the news is a distortion of what the reality is. The church is still preaching a separation of sex and spirit. All churches.
And Jeffre knows because she was a sex therapist for 25 years before this work.
And that concept of shame has to be a tremendous inhibition.
It's huge. And you don't get over it easily.
But you see, that's the healing power, the gift of Tantra. If you view sex and spirit as different flavors of the same energy, then nothing's wrong, nothing's better. It's all living to the fullest with passion.
And what about people who have difficulty with their body image?
That can be an issue, not always. I have met many people who had trouble loving their body, but they still love sex. So it's kind of a hard one to predict when you meet someone or talk with them. You might be very surprised.
Now, what breakthrough techniques for sexual intercourse unavailable anywhere else do you have in this book?
You know, there's a lot of books about sex, as I said, but there's only like 2 or 3 that say the purpose of the book is to talk about sexual intercourse. There are many, many wonderful ways to have orgasms and exchange pleasure other than intercourse, but it's something we love because you're sharing the same energy, the same experience. What's unique about Tantric pathways is that it breaks down the multitude of erogenous zones, we call them sweet spots, to again not use a medical term, and how to stimulate them during intercourse and how to add other stimulation during intercourse and how to hit the internal sweet spots and how to pace yourself and change the rhythms that you do in order to generate the energy that rises and then exchanges it and engulfs you. That's a very short version of the last half of the book.
Now, I'm not going to talk openly during this program about my personal relationship with my wife, but one thing that we do have together in our sexual togetherness is she likes to massage and receive massage. I like to massage and receive massage. How important is that physical contact, that general loving, healing energy in preparing for the deeper factors?
It's very important. It's important for mental health, and it's important for relationship health. You know, we only discovered 50 or 60 years ago that touch, that kind of gentle touch, is essential for life, for babies. So it continues with us as we get older. And it is one of the most beautiful, complete ways to exchange energy with your partner.
For me, particularly, my Kundalini doesn't awaken if all the attention is on my jewels, my genitals. So touch, massage, kissing and hugging and all the other, what typically is considered foreplay is not really foreplay. It's its own experience that awakens the flow of Kundalini when you have the skills and the awareness to do it.
So again, if we're not focused on the destination, focusing on getting to the place rather than the destination is really the aspect we're looking for here.
Right.
Now, how can supernatural sex be used to extend lovemaking in terms of the length of time that people are together?
The average sexual encounter in this country is about 10 minutes. The average woman takes 30 minutes to come to orgasm. So it makes sense that more time is necessary. But for many people, sex becomes very secondary in their lives once they're married and they think they're settled down forever and that kind of thing. But for real pleasure, and for the man as well, real pleasure is lasting longer. Tantra is very feminine in its structure. And as Somraj wrote a book about it, men can learn to last longer. And most men go about it incorrectly. They go about it in a very short-term kind of way that sometimes isn't even fun. And women learn to guide lovingly in Tantra. And both can benefit tremendously from these techniques just to increase desire and pleasure for both.
The importance of the feminine approach to this work. Tantric Pathways to Supernatural Sex is their book. My guests are Somraj Pokras, Jeffre Talltrees. We'll be back with more after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
Ascending Hearts is no ordinary dating site, but a spiritual dating site with a purpose, to link you with your soulmate. We engineer the serendipity so you can trust that you will attune with someone that has the same matching vibration as you. Ascending Hearts, the conscious dating site for the spiritually aware. Try Ascending Hearts for free. AscendingHearts.com.
Change and growth are part of natural life, and also part of your spiritual life. Everyone needs support and guidance, especially during life passages. Upgrade yourself with the OMTimes Experts program. With OMTimes Experts, you have access to the best intuitive coaches, spiritual teachers, counselors, astrologists, and oracles. Our team was carefully selected so you can trust. Find out more at experts.omtimes.com.
Hi, I'm Kelly Fox, host and astrologer of The Astrology Show. Each week, I'll give you access to the current transits, which are a valuable tool that provide astrological information to help unlock the potential each of us has. Understanding the stars can help steer us in the right direction to make better informed choices. So if you're wondering what's going to happen in your week ahead, be sure to tune in to The Astrology Show for guidance. Mondays at 9 p.m. Eastern Time.
Grab a cup of tea or a glass of wine and tune in for Inspired Conversations with publisher Linda Joy on Tuesdays at 2 p.m. Eastern. Linda creates sacred space for leading female luminaries, empowering authors, heart-centered female entrepreneurs, coaches, and healers. A soulful venue where guests openly share the fears and obstacles they've overcome, wisdom and lessons learned, and the personal journey that led them to the transformational work they do in the world. Inspired Conversations to empower you on your path to authentic, soulful living.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guests this week are Somraj Pokras and Jeffre Talltrees, the authors of Tantric Pathways to Supernatural Sex, a groundbreaking look at the chemistry of sexual electricity. Let's talk about issues that both men and women have. How does supernatural sex help women who struggle to orgasm?
I love that question. Sex for women after about 35 or 40 is predominantly psychological and not hormonally driven. So Tantra is a natural fit for this kind of situation. So the woman who's beyond the childbearing years, or that's not her goal in sex any longer, she's going to learn in Tantra that sex is a good thing, sex is a divine thing, sex is something that makes her feel really good.
Nourishing.
As you can imagine, and nourishing, yeah. And as you can imagine, someone who enters into a sexual moment with her beloved, and she knows she's going to be fulfilled. She knows she's going to enjoy it. She knows she's going to have an orgasm or 2 or 3. She's going to want it more. So I believe that women can benefit from a more tantric approach because the pressure to perform is reduced dramatically.
And in essence, what we're saying is, at that stage, the most important sweet spot or erogenous zone is the mind.
You got it.
And what about men? How can they benefit from supernatural sex?
Well, men are, driven to being performance-oriented, focusing on the woman's orgasm and delaying their own. And I think one thing we haven't made clear is really the fundamental definition of supernatural sex, which is not orgasm-focused. We have lots of orgasms. We have many different kinds. The original name of this book was 12 Types of Orgasm. But what supernatural sex really does is it creates a continuous orgasmic state, not a momentary event. As you keep saying, the journey, not the destination, is to get in that place of high vibration, a high degree of sensation, a lot of energy exchanged at different levels of love and thought and talking and vision and exchanging power and leadership, all the different forces that are at work, and get into that state, and you don't want to leave it. You don't want to have a big explosion and roll over and go to sleep. You want to stay there when you get into this higher state. That's another way of looking at supernatural. So when men make that shift and learn how to marshal and raise their energy out of their jewels so they don't ejaculate instantly or very quickly like I used to for many decades, then it becomes a more nourishing and holistic experience, as Jeffre explained, for the woman.
So in essence, we're redefining the orgasm.
Exactly.
Yes.
The orgasm is no longer that physical completion. It's a totally different experience.
Right. We have coined the term ozone for the orgasm zone, for that state that Somraj was describing. And that's what it is. It feels like you're on the verge for a long, long time. It's really supernatural.
and ozone being electrically charged oxygen with a level of with the level of electrons, Somraj can, I'm not a chemist, but he can describe this better than I can. We're talking about electrons jumping to a higher level.
That's right.
Yeah.
So it really is that way.
Of course, we have an O-zone to distinguish between the chemical. Yeah.
Okay. How can supernatural sex then improve a couple's relationship?
Good question. I can attest, based on 25 years of experience, that sex plays a critical role in holding a couple together, in making the relationship fulfilling. And it's amazing when you really begin to look at the mechanics that having an enjoyable sex life motivates you to work things out regardless of the source of the conflict.
You know, it's funny, in my relationship with my wife, she really appreciates my S&M. That's scrubbing and mopping, but that's another story.
Not as sadistic as I first thought you meant.
That's correct. That's correct. And I cook also, and she really loves that. What is pleasure peaking, and what role does it play in supernatural sex?
Great exercise that we learned from our first teacher was self-pleasure, masturbate, to 3 peaks, and don't go over the top. That really changed my life, because the whole idea of stimulation, whether it's intercourse, oral sex, anal, whatever it is, you get more and more and more turned on. When you know how to handle the rise, the spiking of excitement, and spread it out, then you can have that high excitement longer instead of having it explode. And this is a technique, a skill that's a critical part of our book, Tantric Pathways, which is how to rise up on the sexual peak, how to mellow out, go back down to a trough, maybe not as low, but take a breath, and then go up again, and then have the peaks spread out to become longer and longer. We call them plateaus, although they're just simply the same thing. And that ultimately leads to the ability to have full body orgasms, extended orgasms, and multiple orgasms by going up and down the peaks and troughs at great length.
Jeffre, would you like to add to that?
I was just thinking that for a man, a physical ejaculation is equated with orgasm. And for a woman, we don't, well, some women do ejaculate, but normally for orgasm, that's not necessarily an occurrence. So how does a woman experience the same kind of thing that Somraj described? And it is a recognition that there are thousands of kinds of orgasm, that there's not just one kind of orgasm. And so those peaks he was referring to sometimes go so far, they almost feel like a physical orgasm. They are so pleasurable. And it reduces the need for that physical orgasm, or at least pushes it off into the future a little bit.
How can supernatural sex help with sexual dysfunction and healing problems?
We have a number of different ways. Certainly the tantric attitude, which we describe in the book, is very important, because that's where you begin to kind of change your mind about the role of sex in your life. It's not something to put on the back burner. It's something to put on the front burner with a few other things. I had an interesting situation in my own life. My husband and I, not Somraj, but my previous husband, he and I went to a counselor because we were having some conflict and we didn't know how to resolve it. And the counselor told us that we should be having, well, he didn't say it that way. Counselors don't say should. That it might be a good idea to have a minimum of a monthly getaway date for a weekend of sex without children and without dogs, and a weekly date night. Changed our relationship 100%. Just
Absolutely.
Just kind of putting it number one.
I agree 100%. Now, let me ask you one question here. My wife is 62. I'm 66. Can we employ and enjoy the techniques in supernatural sex? What I'm asking is one never too old to learn?
One is never too old to learn, but you have to want it. You have to want to learn. But if you do, you're never too old. By the way, your ages make you youngsters. You have a long way to go.
That's
a lot of sex ahead of you.
That's wonderful to hear. My guest this week on Destination Unlimited, Somraj Pokras, Jeffre Talltrees, the authors of Tantric Pathways to Supernatural Sex. Somraj, Jeffre, one more time, please tell, oh, I can't even talk tonight. One more time, please, I'm so excited. Please tell our listeners where they can find out more about your book, your websites, your activities, and the services that you provide to couples.
Our new site, just getting up to speed, is supernatural.sex, where you can learn about this book and links to buy it. Our previous site is called tantra@tahoe.com.
And what about couples who would like to study with you?
Good idea.
Tantra at Tahoe, by the way, is AT in the middle. It's not the @ sign. So it's tantra@tahoe.com. And that's probably the best way, because we give you an invitation. We ask you to take a small questionnaire, and we will give you an hour of our time to determine if you're right for this program.
Well, I got to say thank you so much for joining us this week. Your information is wonderful. It's inspiring. It's hopeful to couples who are finding difficulty in their communication and their togetherness. And I'm grateful that there are folks like you out there doing this work. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Our pleasure. Thank you so much, Victor.
And thank you for joining us on Destination Unlimited. I'm Victor the Voice Furman. Have a wonderful week.